Let me introduce Professor George Siemens from Athabasca University. It gives us the pleasure and the honor of being the president of the scientific council of this project. Thank you, George, to be with us, and I would like to listen, or we would like to listen, some topics about the conclusions of these debates. George, thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to present to this group again and to talk about some of the challenges that teachers face in terms of school models of the future. And I want to say a particular thank you, Antonio, for the work that you've done in trying to get this conversation started and sticking with this. I know this has been an area of focus for you for several years, and this is something that is increasingly timely, especially when you see different school systems around the world looking at how they can improve their model of teaching and learning and how they can design an education system that is more responsive to the needs of individual students. Now, one of the areas where this change is perhaps most pronounced is in regard to the impact of new technologies and how that influences new methodologies or new practices within the classrooms. So I want to briefly look at a few of the points, to look at, just quickly make sure I'm not advancing too far. Looking at some of the challenges from these new technologies. So, for example, if we consider what's happening with the teaching and learning process in society today, and if we consider the the impact, at least, of the technologies that students now have at their disposal, we've seen over the last decade some just astonishing change in terms of the ability that individual students have to control the creation and the sharing of content. For example, mobile phones right now are probably the most popular computing device in the world. And, well over 1.5 billion people around the world walk around with a computer in their pocket that is more developed than technology that you and I were using even only 8 years ago. So these new tools, whether it's to create content, images or checking into locations or social networking services, these tools change the relationship between the educator and the student. And these changes then require that we think about what are the different teaching methodologies or what are the different teaching practices that an educator should be thinking about adopting in terms of classroom settings. Particularly if you look at the communication process that students are involved in. The ability, I think, for individuals to take resources and to very quickly distribute them and share them in online forums, I think, can't be overstated in terms of the consequential impact of that. Next slide here, we're looking at some of the distributing content relating to online tutoring. When individuals create their content in different pieces, it's not structured the way that they've perhaps been used to in a course or the way they've been used to in a textbook. What we have now, instead of one place or a course to go to for all of your resources, you're finding bits and pieces of your learning material all over the web. Now, these pieces, you might encounter them in the form of a resource that you see on TED Talks. It might be in the form of a resource that you encounter in an online community that might be, let's say in Portugal, or it might be in Brazil, or it might be English speaking, or it might be increasingly Chinese. So these are the kinds of pieces of content that we find all over the web. And when we pull these together, that really is our learning experience. And the question for an educator starts to be, how do I effectively tutor students and how do I assist them as they begin to interact in these different forums and pull together these different information pieces? It's an important concept, but it's not one that we fully have a good sense of now. But if you consider even briefly with a combination of Khan Academy, with a combination of TED Talks and open educational resources and better communication technologies, whether it's Skype, video, Adobe Connect, there's a tremendous opportunity for educators to assist students in pulling together and really creating a more of a coherent structure of these different educational, these different content pieces that they're interacting and they're encountering as they're involved in online spaces. So this distributed content, I think, is one of the key game changers in teaching and learning today. And the ability of an educator to assist students in making sense of that through effective online tutoring, I think, is is an important counterpoint to that as well. Now, the communication aspect of this is one that we can't overlook in terms of its importance. If you have a look at how the communication process has changed in the last decade, it's absolutely amazing. And I recall this from my first experiences when I was still at Red River College, and my first experience with communicating online via video with a group of students. This was the late 90s, and video was terribly expensive, and I had to do it in a television studio. The students were in special labs so that they could receive the bandwidth transmission. It was a very technical process and a very expensive process. But today, with Skype, for example, it's a process that's been reduced to almost zero in terms of complexity. And we can do desktop-to-desktop conferencing. You can use tools like FaceTime, iPads, and mobile devices to have video chats, Skype video conversations. So the opportunity around this communication, especially from an educational standpoint, is quite substantial. And the reason it's substantial is experience I had, at least, with going through different, and I do a fair bit of traveling, and I see a lot of different university sectors. And almost always, this is reflective of a period in the early 2000s and perhaps even later 90s where universities spent an enormous amount of money building video conferencing rooms. And a lot of these video conferencing rooms sit empty because the process of using these tools is fairly involved and it's somewhat technical as well. But the desktop tools, on the other hand, are very popular, especially for educators who are teaching students in tools like Adobe or Blackboard Collaborate. The ability to quickly connect and informally create a group to meet with on a short-term basis is quite valuable. So the complexity of video conferencing systems is a bit of a drawback, but the ease of use of Skype and desktop tools has been very effective for educators to start developing their communication or their teaching approaches in different online settings. But it's not just the educators, because one of the outcomes of these technologies has been that the students now have better access to these tools as well, which means group work activities, collaboration with colleagues in different countries, even bringing in educators as guest speakers can help to increase the learning opportunities for students. So I think from a communication perspective, we've sort of grown up in the last 5 years. Every 6 months there's a new tool and a new innovation. But pulling back a little bit and looking at how rapidly that's happened and how significant that change is, and you really start to see that we're really at a point where the education system, the teaching model of education, is facing some really significant changes in the future because of how effective these tools have become over the last decade. Other aspects of the tools that we have and the skills that teachers need really relates to formative evaluation. And much of education system has a heavy emphasis on summative evaluation, but and I recall this from my earliest days of taking courses in teacher education and adult learning theory, is that we really want more formative assessment. We want to be able to provide students with feedback and assessment that helps them to make improvements to their learning activities, rather than an assessment or a model of teaching and learning that only evaluates learners at the end. And this is one of the real opportunities around being connected, let's say, within a social network. Because formative assessment and formative evaluation doesn't have to come only from the educator. It can come from peers. In fact, with open courses I've taught, some of the best assessment and the best evaluation models have come when networks or groups of peers are able to comment on each other's work and provide insight and direction to those activities. So when we're talking about the evaluation process, when we share our ideas through social networks, through blogs, when we're actively involved in communicating via Twitter, these communication procedures allow others to see the activities that we're involved in and then to provide comment and feedback in a developmental way, rather than with a more traditional model of having feedback occurring really in the form of an essay or an assignment at the end. I'll give you an example. One of the courses that I've run several years now around connectivism and connective knowledge with Stephen Downs, one of the activities that we've been engaged in those courses has been to take the experience that we've had from the interactions within these different forums, and then sharing that experience with students through the commenting and the review process. So let me be more clear on that. One of the activities students do is they create concept maps and they create essays, short essays, only about 1,000 words or 750 words. And then these essays are shared with other students while still in draft form, so that formative evaluation occurs from the network and formative evaluation of concept maps occurs from the networks that students can then take back and they can revise and improve on. So much like better tools for creating and sharing content have influenced teaching models and have influenced communication models, they also influence how we can collaborate and share and how we can conduct effective evaluations. It's very easy to share an essay assignment or an image and receive feedback from our peers before we do our final assessment on those particular artifacts. And I think on a final note, there's a variety of points that I think as educators we need to be particularly aware of. We've looked really briefly at 4 points here now, and that's been talking about how the new technologies create new methodologies. We've also looked at how content elements are distributed online, and one of the roles of an educator is to help to guide learners in making sense of those complex pieces of information through a tutoring process. We've also briefly looked at how the easy-to-use tools, primarily desktop tools, but video, audio, text tools have changed the communication process. And because these technologies have altered the communication process, they've also correspondingly altered the process whereby which individuals can be assessed and can be involved in an evaluation process. So I think the topics that are being discussed over the course of this debate and that have been looked at in the course of this debate are vital for starting to understand what does it mean to be an effective teacher? What does it mean to be able to engage in advanced or complex discussions with students, with faculty members, and really with our colleagues from around the world? And we keep coming back to a variety of tools, the video tools, the audio tools, the text tools, and the ability that we have to quickly and easily share our ideas and to collaborate and connect with others from around the world. Teachers need skills to be able to function in that kind of an environment.
Thank you, George, for your excellent synopsis about the research we have done during our last years concerning this subject.